we're talking about a fascinating offense coordinator hire by the TCU Horned Frogs. Yes, that's right. The national runner-up. They have a new offensive coordinator. Garrett Riley, of course, their former offense coordinator, took the job at Clemson. So now TCU has decided to bring in Kendal Briles, the former Arkansas offensive coordinator, to come in, run their offense, run their system, this air raid philosophy. It's very intriguing. It's all very intriguing just because of, Sonny Dykes, what they did with Garrett Riley, the fact that Sonny Dykes worked with Art Briles in the past at Texas Tech. A lot of connections here, a lot of similar philosophies that I do think can work out really, really well in the football field. But before we go to that, let's just kind of talk about one thing that I found really interesting about this hire. At the time when the whole Art Briles situation was going on, there was a fan base that was particularly loud about things that were going on at Baylor. And obviously, when you have a rival, you're going to talk about a lot. And TCU was a program and a fan base and a newspaper/city in Fort Worth that talked about it a lot and really talked about the Baylor program, really badly. And obviously, a lot of it was earned. A lot of it was deserved for what happened at Baylor. Totally understand that. But I also think that it'd be very hypocritical if you didn't turn around and say, oh, well, we just hired the guy who was involved in that, who we just kind of talked about for a long time during that summer of 2015. And so I found that to be kind of one of the more interesting headlines of this, is just that it's now a rivalry that's turned even more, and you're seeing it all come full circle. TCU's obviously has Kaz Kazadi, who was at Baylor as well during that time as their strength and conditioning coordinator, and then now you have Kendal Briles coming in. So I just think that it's one of those things where in college football, things can just happen like this, and things do come full circle. And I've seen a lot of, outrage from some of the TCU fan base, and then some I've heard that, Kendal didn't know anything, and so it's a perfectly fine hire, and, to each their own. That's your opinion on it. But I do think that if, a lot of people did say some things, and now here we are, and Kendal Briles is at TCU. So let's move on to the football field after all that. Florida Atlantic is where he was at first, then Houston, then Florida State, then Arkansas. Those were his stops after spending 8 years with the Baylor program. At every stop, he's gone in and helped elevate the offense. That's just simply what Kendal Briles has done. And I think some people will talk about the fact that there are some holes in his offense, which we'll get to here in a minute. But I do think that there is a reason to have optimism, because if you look at the numbers, you look at the stats, you come away very impressed with what Kendal Briles has done during his coaching career. So they were 7th nationally in rushing offense this year at Arkansas. They were one of 3 programs to average 230 yards passing and rushing. The only other 2 programs were UCLA and Ole Miss. But shockingly, they only averaged 32.5 points per game. And then, of course, they went 7-6. You would expect with numbers like that, you maybe would score a little bit more and obviously have a better record. A couple things went into that. First of all, the defense at Arkansas was dreadful this year. Secondly, the performance of the offense in the wins versus the performance of the offense in the losses was quite appalling. And what I mean by that, in the wins this year for Arkansas, they averaged 42.5 points per game. In the losses, they only averaged 20 points per game. That's a huge shift. And I think a big part of that, it's kind of one of those things that has happened at times to Kendal's offense, and that is in the red zone, they sometimes struggle to score, and when they absolutely have to run the ball to put a game away, they're unable to. And those things did happen a few times there at Arkansas. Now, as far as the fit, I mentioned it a little bit, that air raid connection, the philosophy being very similar to Sonny Dykes, the kind of mindset of, hey, we saw what Garrett Riley did, and he knew the scheme and came in and fit effortlessly with Sonny Dykes, and now can Kendal Briles do the same thing? We'll see, but I'm pretty optimistic about that. I think this pairing is actually going to work pretty well for TCU on the field. I think the bigger thing, really, my bigger question mark with TCU isn't necessarily the concepts or the scheme at this point. It's the talent. And really, in particular, it's the talent they're losing, because they're losing a whole lot of talent off this roster. Now they're kind of having to rebuild a little bit and revamp some things. So kind of look around a little bit, Chandler Morris is the quarterback for now. He won the starting job over Max Duggan. He was going to be the starting quarterback for this TCU team, and then he got injured, and Duggan, of course, took over. We know the rest. He had an amazing year for TCU, but Morris is back. Looks like he'll probably be the guy. And I think that's pretty safe to say, especially because TCU hasn't really been able to hit in the transfer portal like many thought they would. They lost a battle with Baylor for Sawyer Robertson. They lost a battle with Ole Miss for Walker Howard. So now they're sitting here with Chandler Morris as their starting quarterback. And that's not the only change here. You look at their running back position, their wide receiver position. They hit the transfer portal really hard. And it's going to be fascinating to watch, because they went and got guys who were like 5-star dudes going into college that just didn't quite work out at their previous stops. And those guys in particular are Trey Sanders, running back from Alabama. You got JoJo Earl, who was also at Alabama at wide receiver. Those are two big names for this program. They also went out, got John Paul Richardson from Oklahoma State, Jack Besh from LSU, a really good chain-moving type wide receiver, and then Jalen Robinson, the most recent one from Ole Miss, and you pair them with Jordan Hudson, who's returning, and you got to think that receiving core will be pretty good going into next season. The running back room, we'll see. We'll see what all that looks like, and we'll see how the offensive line looks like as they lose a lot. But they did bring in Tommy Brockermeyer, another transfer from Alabama, to help shore up the offensive line. That's a lot of new faces. That's a lot of new guys that you're going to have to integrate in this offense. You're going to have to figure out a way to make sure that you're utilizing them to their best of their abilities, and you're hoping that they're not simply washed, because that's a possibility, right? Like, not every 5-star is going to hit, and especially not every 5-star who's transferring from another school after a year or two is going to hit. So TCU fans in this TCU program hoping that they will. And under Kendal Briles, you would kind of think that he's going to put them in a pretty good position to at least put up numbers and put up stats in this air raid offense. I think that when you look at what they did this year, I expect them to take a step back, but not a huge step back. And what I mean by that is TCU was 9th in scoring offense this year at 38.8 per game. They were great offensively. I think they'll average right around 35 points per game, which will be awesome for next season. That'll give them a chance to repeat as Big 12 champs if everything comes together, of course. But in general, it's a very controversial hire, but also in my eyes, a very good hire if you're Sonny Dykes. This is a guy who can come in and really just kind of keep things going from what Garrett Riley did a season ago. So thanks for listening this week. I'll be back next week to talk about some more off-season storylines, some big news and notes from the world that is college football. But thanks for listening to Crystal Ball College Football.